Hi, I'm still Kyle, and I like comparing movies to food. The trade-off of developing something for mass appeal is that the maximum possible quality of that thing goes down. You're gonna find a Chipotle in every town in America, and it always is going to taste fine, so as not to offend the delicate palates of our Midwestern brothers and sisters. If it tasted like your local taco stand, there would always be a group of people who didn't want to eat it because it's too spicy and the little tortillas don't taste like the ones from Kroger. And that's unacceptable when the objective is to sell as many as physically possible. This same principle can be translated into movies and other forms of storytelling. Everybody who watches The Eternals has the exact same experience, mostly not being able to remember anything that happened in The Eternals. Meanwhile, the art that changes your life likely won't have the same impact on everybody else. Some people might even hate it for reasons you know are an important part of the overall experience. For example, there's an absolutely comical take I've been seeing pop up for the last year or so that if you like Uncle Iroh from Avatar: The Last Airbender, you're glorifying a war criminal. And assuming there's any sincerity to this opinion whatsoever, it reflects a very concerning inability to understand or appreciate the moral conflict inherent to the character. And it's confusing to me that we wouldn't be able to see it that way. Like, the show aired on Nickelodeon and I thought we all got it when we were like 12. But the inability to stomach a slightly morally complex character comes from a lack of exposure and being accustomed to a much blander selection of morals and storytelling. If you're used to stories about relatively flawless heroes saving people from mustache-twirling villains, the nuances of a regretful man who once helped lead a xenophobic military operation might give you some indigestion. There's a stereotype that Gen Z specifically lacks media literacy, or the ability to read into the context and nuance of a piece of art and see beyond the surface level. But I don't think it's their fault. I don't think media literacy is even a common skill. I know it because I had it hammered into my head in AP classes and because my life weirdly circled back around to make it relevant again. But I think most people just watch stuff for fun, and this is mostly new information, which is why I make these videos. Beyond our educations though, I've been noticing a growing trend in the media industry with narratives that contain more bland, sanitized storytelling. The crazy part is I've seen this change before, but in reverse. When I was in film school, morally gray characters were all anybody could fucking talk about. We'd had enough of noble Jedi versus the evil Empire. We wanted our protagonists to be mean and kill people and do drugs and swear. The golden age of television was led by Tony Soprano, Dr. House, Walter White, Don Draper. Anybody who wasn't a middle-aged white dude? No. Oh yeah, man. What a great show. Point is, since the invention of film, there's been a steady swing back and forth between a popular preference for either spicy, complicated characters struggling with moral conflict, or straightforward black and white good versus evil. And pretty consistently, the best stories happen when the characters, especially the heroes, have to make a few morally questionable decisions. There's nothing particularly deep or substantive you can draw from a story about the objective good guys versus the objective evil guys. Think you're telling me I gotta pick between the Fellowship of Consent and Justice or the League of Unnecessary Suffering? Because I don't trust that first one, it's a sus name. This kind of binary characterization can work as an initial framing device, like in Star Wars, but it tends to be a tad dishonest if it's never really challenged, like in Star Wars. When you get to make all the rules, good guys versus bad guys is a very safe option. We've been through a few eras of this trend already, and they tend to align with real-world periods of social distress. And in the last few years, it's been making a hell of a comeback. And leading the charge is the good old future of television itself. Thank you all so much for watching and interacting with the last video. It's been performing well above what we expected, and it's been a great morale boost for the new team to see everybody enjoying it so much. There has been one frustrating development. Warner Brothers Studios has copyright claimed the video because of the Iron Giant footage. It should fall well within fair use, just like our previous essays, but nobody at YouTube actually reviews copyright claim disputes. I have to explain why it doesn't violate anything, and then Warner Brothers says no. So as of now, we aren't getting any of the ad revenue generated by that video, ever. In fact, it's all going to Warner Brothers, even though they aren't the main focus of the video. We're really trying to get this new production schedule off the ground, and we want to fairly pay our new writers, editor, and marketing team for their work, while also still supporting myself. If you've been enjoying the new content and are excited for more, direct donations this month would go a long way toward our continued success. The Patreon has also been revamped recently and has an entire library of exclusive content, including behind the scenes and podcasts and just bonus videos that we're adding to every month. Thank you for watching and appreciating my work. Anyway, film history. It was the year 1903. The Great Train Robbery, the first action blockbuster, followed a gang of bandits as they murdered train passengers and stole their money, and they were the protagonists, and people ate that shit up. At the time, it was the most influential narrative movie ever made, and even though it doesn't seem like much now, it was a pretty harrowing look at the ugly world of crime. Westerns were the big craze at this point, comparable to the early days of superhero movies, except that they weren't historical fiction at that point, they were like currently happening, so maybe like the first Breaking Bad. As cameras became easier to make and this new medium picked up steam, it stayed with the sensationalist angle that had already worked, earning Hollywood a reputation for increasingly scandalous plots, scenes, and characters. Early movies had gangsters, anti-heroes, drag queens, gays, bisexuals, and also a lot of blackface. Just so much blackface. They didn't really distinguish between the types of social taboo they were willing to play with because it was all profitable. Movies were also largely seen as a working class spectacle, something the poor spent their nickels on, and how foreigners educated themselves on the superior ways of Western civilization. And as we all know, we can't leave poor people to just do whatever the hell they want unsupervised, otherwise they turn into communists. There was a huge push from multiple directions to regulate movie content. The progressive movement of the era wanted to use them for educational purposes, and to wipe out narrow-minded prejudices within their audiences. And in some ways, the racist ones, that was certainly needed, but this was still the 1930s, and we all know that wasn't the thing they had a problem with. That was a Thomas Edison quote, by the way. The Christians also weren't a huge fan of Hollywood, but they did want to use movies to tell people about Jesus. So that hasn't changed. This all led to the Motion Picture Association of America taking matters into their own hands and establishing the Hays Code, which prohibited nudity, sex, violence, perversions like being gay or interracial marriage, ridicule of the clergy, and most pertinent here, sympathy for criminals, whatever they decided that meant. If a movie failed this very subjective assessment in any way, no major distributor would purchase or show them. Cowboy movies entered their late-stage Marvel era, where instead of being lovable outlaws, the good guys wore white hats, the bad guys wore black hats, and the women still got kidnapped as God intended. Characters could be flawed, but only within strict boundaries. John Wayne's character in The Searchers begins the film as a cold-blooded maniac who kills Native Americans for sport, but by the end, he decides that perhaps one of them deserves to live, like a proper enlightened American. By the 50s, though, we had TV and foreign films offering all sorts of new graphic content. The MPAA, still boxed in by the Hays Code, just couldn't keep up. Movies kept making money even if they got banned, and they just started approving stuff even if it didn't pass, before finally reforming the code with a rating system closer to what we're now familiar with in 1968. And then things got crazy again. Following decades dug into the gritty underbelly of society with exploitation films and revisionist westerns like The Wild Bunch and High Plains Drifter. Westerns lasted such a long time, you have no idea. In 1979, Roger Ebert, a Roman Catholic, critiqued the very explicit movie Caligula so tolerantly it wouldn't even have made the news back in the Hays era, saying, "It's not good cinema, and it's not good porn." The pearl clutching of the 1920s was truly gone. Then, Star Wars!
McConkey.
We had lighthearted adventure movies during the economic booms of the 80s and 90s. Superman, Ghostbusters, E.T., Indiana Jones, punching Nazis left and right. Yay, America! Nobody is gay still. Then another return to gritty realism in the 2000s after 9/11, the Bush administration, and the 2008 recession. This is the one a lot of us grew up with. But these shifts started to feel more and more gradual and driven by the taste of mainstream audiences rather than top-down regulations. With the introduction of cable TV and then streaming services, writers had even more flexibility and a lot of incentive to create explicit narratives with high production values. AMC's Breaking Bad, HBO's Game of Thrones, Netflix's Black Mirror. It was the best of both worlds. All the convenience and longevity of TV shows with the quality and spectacle of the theater. It seems like the industry was irreversibly changed and there was no turning back. That was nice. Censorship was relaxed by a growing variation in distribution options, and we see it coming back now that those platforms are reconsolidating into a singular mass. All of our favorite IPs are getting swallowed up into fewer and fewer streaming platforms as the exclusive way to experience them. Movie theaters and physical media are slowly but surely being phased out. The vast majority of media today is being fought over by 6 companies: Netflix, Amazon Prime, Hulu, Disney+, HBO, and Apple TV. That fight will be won or lost by the popularity of the IPs possessed by those companies and the way that company is publicly perceived. It makes no difference for us, of course. It just changes the logo that we see when we boot up the smart TV. But there is more pressure than ever before for them to gather and maintain subscribers. So what does this 100-year cycle teach us? I think if anything, we can see that the moral flip-flopping comes from a paradox at the core of the film industry. Good art demands risk, while good business hates it. The best stories are the ones not just anyone could pull off. They're guaranteed to offend some and impress others. But the best businesses are the ones that read the room, plan ahead, and find a sustainable way to grow. While we probably won't see a new Hays Code, we're certainly entering another era of sanitization and moral purity, and for largely the same reasons as in the 20s and 30s. Massive wealth disparities have cranked political unrest up to a boiling point, and corporations, streaming platforms in particular, are feeling the heat and trying to adapt the only way they know how, by trying to please everyone. It's the reason Marvel movies can never be making too clear of a political statement, even when they're about a black guy taking up the mantle of Captain America, or a woman entering a career field dominated by men, or the consequences of mass government surveillance. If they take too hard of a stance in any direction, they risk alienating whatever part of their fan base disagrees with that stance. Whether or not it's true, that's all that matters to them. So the heroes become virtuous and selfless, no matter their age, gender, origin, or past actions. The villains, if they even exist, are unaffiliated, mustache-twirling murderers, so that even if they accidentally make a good point, they're still unsupportable because they're going about achieving their goals in the wrong way. Studios want the aesthetic of controversy to gain attention, but without any of the risk entailed by it. The Barbie movie came out in 2023 and was advertised as a feminist blockbuster for the girls. But while it references a lot of heavily nuanced topics, it always stops before anyone can get too uncomfortable. It certainly embraces the image of being for and about women, and clearly understands many of the points it wants to make, but then somehow all our favorite moments end up being about Ken, who gets his own song and comedically carries the entire movie. But that's okay, because the men metaphorically represent women being second-class citizens who are never taken seriously, which makes Barbie World a representation of the patriarchy? And then the Kens have a successful one-day revolution where they make an actual patriarchy, heavily implying that the Barbies were never really that smart in the first place. And then they have to be taken down with feminism, which doesn't really work for the analogy, but it's an important lesson about how dangerous the marginalized class can be and what happens if they gain power. Wait, I'm confused. Can America Ferrera explain being a woman to me?
You have to be able to eat. You have to have money. It is literally impossible.
It's fine. Just make sure it ends by implying nothing is anyone's fault, corporations are harmless, and we should all just get along. That way we don't alienate all the men who have been eagerly awaiting the Barbie movie. It worked though, made tons of money, and lots of people see it as very empowering. It's hard to notice this stuff if you're not looking for it, and our moms all liked the Barbie movie because compared to the context they grew up in, even the nod to the problem feels revolutionary. But the pendulum is still currently swinging backwards, and it moves much faster than we realize. And there is no clearer measuring stick for how much things have changed than Netflix. While they're not 100% responsible for the direction of modern media or anything, they've been around long enough to bridge the transition from one decade to the next. And so we can see the difference just in their content. When Netflix first started producing original stuff, they were still primarily a mail-order DVD rental company. They had pretty recently introduced the concept of in-home streaming, and they were the only ones really doing so in any functional way. By moving into original productions, they weren't just competing with network television, they had to create content that rivaled the most prestigious dramas of all time. Everyone had an HBO subscription just to watch Breaking Bad and Game of Thrones, so Netflix realized they also needed something that could only be watched on Netflix. So they did the only thing that could ever work. They hired some artists, and they let them do their thing. From 2013 to 2019, Netflix picked up the morally gray flag and took off with it. I don't think a show as unique and weird and blunt as BoJack Horseman could ever have existed on any other platform. Their collaboration with Marvel Studios was able to explore a completely different side of the MCU in line with the grittier comic characters. Unlike the movies that were clean, quippy, and mostly bloodless, these shows were pretty fucking brutal. We had stories like Jessica Jones examining lifelong trauma at the hands of an abusive narcissist, Luke Cage representing the experiences of being an impoverished Black American, and Iron Fist, there he is, Mindhunter, Ozark, Sex Education, Arcane. Netflix has been our go-to source of deep, nuanced characters for years. But now, that is the past. BoJack ended before the start of COVID, and that was 5 years ago. Netflix has grown and evolved, and they are no longer struggling to maintain relevance or compete against cable networks. Not only are they popular enough to be a running adult animated slop like Big Mouth and not suffering for it, but they're currently poised to gain a monopoly control over the industry, recently spending $82 billion to acquire Warner Brothers Studios, who owns HBO, and is most recently known as the company who incorrectly filed a copyright strike against my last video and took all my ad revenue. Seriously, please check out our Patreon, it's a nice place. So how do you go from a snail mail movie rental service with dreams of being a star to owning a majority of Hollywood? What changed in the last 5 years or so to turn Netflix and its contemporaries into cowards? In September of 2020, Netflix released a film called Cuties. It was a movie about an 11-year-old girl competing in a dance group, reportedly intended as a cautionary tale about child exploitation. But it actually just did the thing it was supposedly trying to criticize, undermining any point it claimed to be making. There was a pretty major Netflix boycott as a result, including an attempted lawsuit, which was dropped, but the damage was done. The next weekend saw an 8-fold increase in canceled subscriptions, and the event was clear proof that controversy has consequences. tangible, monetary consequences. In a market as competitive as movie streaming, any Hitch and Company expansion could be the beginning of the end. And since 2020, I don't know, everybody's just been really tense for some reason. Public scrutiny of media companies feels like a daily topic at this point. Turns out that not all press is good press, and that incentivizes distribution platforms and in turn writers to play it safe. A senior character who offends any group could lead to another Cuties incident in their minds, because in their made-up game where they're trying to win all the world's money, child exploitation is in the same category of risky content as, I don't know, Sokka being slightly sexist in Avatar. In the original show, Sokka starts off with some pretty silly beliefs about the roles of men and women. He comes from a very traditionally structured community, where as a man, he's expected to be a warrior and a protector, while the women are caretakers. Thing is, all the men in his tribe are gone, his sister has superpowers, and he's 14. His perspective is very obviously wrong, and the show in no way endorses or validates it. Everything that happens to him disproves his belief. In the first 4 episodes of the show, he is routinely outmatched by anyone and everyone he comes across. He makes a shitty sexist comment about Katara, and she responds by fracturing an iceberg. He prepares for battle against the Fire Nation, and he's easily taken out. He spends the entire fight aboard Zuko's ship as a prop for comedy. And then when he meets the Kyoshi warriors, it shatters anything left of his worldview by challenging it more directly than ever before. Like, sure, Katara could freeze him, but she has magic powers, that's not fair. Basuki makes him face what we already know, that he's not the hot shit he so desperately wants to be. And when he's challenged with the indisputable fact that he's wrong, he doesn't double down on what he was taught. He accepts, and he humbly asks to be given a second chance, and then changes. His initial sexism is the setup to show us who he really is. By the end of the season, he's believably winning over a princess and beefing with the Northern Water Tribe's version of himself, who he is now far surpassed in every way possible. And Netflix shook that all out. In their live-action adaptation from 2024, they just excluded that character trait entirely, because they were too afraid of Sokka coming across as a bad person and younger people not liking him, I guess. But removing that while changing nothing else about what happens just makes everybody around him seem crazy. Like, they get to the Suki story, which exists to challenge his misogyny, and they have no conflict to work with, so they have to ruin her character to compensate. Pretty sure that's the exact opposite of the intended effect. Maybe if you're trying to make your adaptation more progressive and your plan involves diminishing one of the most feminist characters of our childhood, you're going the wrong direction. And it's not just Sokka and Suki. Every character is turned into a flat, single-minded representation of an already very well-established person because they remove any flaws, fears, regrets, or mistakes from their stories. From the first episode, Aang is already a wizened monk instead of a scared kid who ran away from home and doomed the world. Katara is girl-bossing her way through waterbending and doesn't even need a teacher. Nobody is fighting or disagreeing or being selfish in any way, because apparently that's villain shit. Kids these days need relatable role models. Being a hero isn't about recognizing and overcoming your insecurities to grow as a person. It's about never having done anything wrong in the first place. Obviously. I'm not the first person to think that these versions of the characters feel a lot more like their Ember Island players' depictions than the real deal. A lot of people did recognize this as a problem, and there have been plenty of extensive videos about it. But it also seems like this corporate fear of being caught for daring to honestly address moral complexity has trickled down into individual people. And that's where things like the Iroh as a war criminal take comes from. Iroh is engaged in multiple atrocities, yes. His decisions and actions have caused objective suffering to many people. But similar to Sokka, Iroh has specifically learned the error of his ways. He's been irreversibly punished for his past actions by losing his only son, his station, and his honor, and he's devoted the rest of his life to helping others not go down the same path. He exists to explore how someone could ever try to make up for such devastatingly massive mistakes. And he's a success story because he does so as admirably as anybody possibly could. He never rests again, never takes anything he still has for granted, never holds a grudge against Zuko for anything he says or does, no matter how hurtful it may be. He never backs down from doing what's right, or justifies injustice, or takes the easy way out. And it's important that we get to see that, because we've all fucked up at some point or another. It's part of the human experience to do something you can't take back, no matter how much you might want to. And if someone like Iroh can find a path forward, then surely we could too. But seeing how it's a pretty risky character decision, I'm expecting Netflix to have him self-sacrifice sometime during season 2. I got some pushback on my Genu opinions in the last video, but thankfully he's still very relevant here, and I want to clarify some things, because similar to the Iroh opinions, I was surprised to see how many people thought Genu should have died because his sins were too great to overcome. A few thoughts on that. One, dude's been in literal hell for at least 400 years, and we let real people get away with less than a single lifetime for worse crimes. As for what he did while enslaved to a demon lord, I actually don't know what else to say about that. You can't say he doesn't regret it. He lives every moment in agonizing shame, unable to escape the memory of how terrible he was. And even though he gives into the shame and betrays Rumi at one point, in the end he decides to be more than the monster he sees in himself. It narratively makes sense for him to sacrifice what he wants in order to make amends. I just don't think it should be his life. If anything, dying is way too easy for him. It's a cop-out so the writers and Netflix don't have to deal with the real consequences of anything he's done. It would make much more sense for him to give up the freedom he so desperately wants but still have to stay alive, maybe even locking himself and Guima underground for all eternity while freeing the world and the other demons in the process. Who, by the way, they also tease as being more nuanced and sympathetic than the hunters initially believe, but then they just never get back to answering that question. Meanwhile, the hunters just have negative beliefs about themselves that are never shown to have any real impact on anyone else, and they resolve their stories by accepting that those things are fine. Mira and Zoe realize that they shouldn't hide away their jagged edges or colorful ideas, but they haven't. Those are their personalities the whole time, so that's not real character growth because nothing is different. Again, they want the aesthetic of controversy without the risk. Maybe this is wisdom that comes only from my advanced age, but my favorite people in the world are the ones who used to do bad things, recognized that they were wrong, and changed without making it anybody else's problem. I don't trust people who've never had anything to improve because that's not real. And yet this has become the prevailing trend in Netflix's recent sequels. In Bridgerton Season 3, Penelope barely suffers any wrath for all the harm she's done writing her gossip column because she's the main character now, and they don't want to risk spoiling the romance with any real consequences. In Arcane Season 2, and in Stranger Things Season 5, the grand finale to the small-town horror mystery that put Netflix on the map, all of these characters we've seen learn and grow for the better part of a decade dissolve into a contrived D&D party of bland heroes who all get perfectly equal screen time and are incapable of making mistakes. Because if they do, the universe will bend over backwards just to cancel it out. General spoiler warning at this point for Stranger Things, because it's so new. I rewatched the entire series last month, and while previous seasons had their own issues, this new one really highlights the specific problem we've been talking about. I haven't seen this mentioned much anywhere because I think people are still reeling from the disappointment of the ending, but Season 5 completely surprised me by starting off really strong. Aside from a little bit of awkward dialogue right at the start, they actually seem to be recovering from the mess Season 4 made, and by the time it gets to the mid-season finale, everything looks so promising. I would have been totally bought in if I hadn't already known that it crashes and burns after that part. And my god, what a crash it is. After maybe the coolest scene to happen in the entire series, we're suddenly bludgeoned with meaningless dialogue, irrational dragging action scenes, nonsense character decisions, and eventually an AI-generated credit sequence that genuinely would have made me cry if it had been hand-drawn. Was that really too much to ask? I could go scene by scene on everything these last 4 episodes did wrong, but I really want to focus on the moments where allowing some of these characters who we already love to behave in morally questionable ways instead of playing it safe would have made things so much less weird. Let's start with Will's coming out scene. Will is a shy, traumatized, constantly rejected kid with severe parental issues, including an overbearing mother who he can't resent in any way because she saved his life like 3 times. He's also hopelessly in love with his best friend, who is, scientifically speaking, the straightest human being on the planet. And despite the fact that he's braved a couple of demon possessions, he will never live up to his best friend's superhero girlfriend. And either due to trauma or just because he's a wizard, he has been a functionally useless member of this party up until Season 5. We've had a coming out scene on this show before, and it was beautifully written and performed.
She wouldn't stop staring at you. Tammy Thompson. I wanted her to look at me.
Tammy Thompson's a girl.
Steve.
I can't include the full thing here, or Netflix, Warner Brothers, HBO will take all my money again, but you should go watch it. It's treated with all the weight you'd expect of someone sharing that part of themselves during this era. Robin is scared. We see her vulnerability, and then the relief she feels when Steve is totally cool with it is palpable, and we learn of yet another reason to absolutely love Steve. Nothing about this scene is inherently minimized by keeping it just between these 2 characters. In fact, it's these kinds of very personal moments that I think make Season 3 so good. During the good half of Season 5, Will asks Robin for advice, and she tells him how much it helped to just be able to confide in one person. Anyone, just so it didn't feel like she was hiding something anymore. So I had high hopes for how they were going to handle it, but it's so weird. He starts off by just trying to tell his mom, which makes sense. They're about to go on a life-threatening mission to save the world, and his mom has already fought demons for him, so good choice, Will. But then Mike, his crush, interrupts, and Will asks him to stay. An unexpected but well-deserved moment of bravery. Honestly, still no complaints.
I haven't told any of you this, I don't like girls.
Why are all these people in this room? Like, I get that Will needs to clear his conscience here. We've been building up to this, and the actual words he's saying are believable enough. But he's saying these things to his mom, his brother, his best friend, his other two friends, his crush's sister, his crush's girlfriend, this guy Steve, Max, Robin, Robin's roommates, the Amazon driver, the chief of police, this girl Kali who's back for some reason, the directors, Erica, Argyle, Barb, and Vecna. And the fact that you couldn't tell when I started making things up is kind of insane. Disregarding the fact that Will decided to call a staff meeting to discuss his sexuality right before a major deadline, why would he personally do it this way? He's been hiding this part of himself for his whole life. He's struggling to tell even his mom. Half these people he barely knows. It makes very little sense that this moment is even happening like this. If you were in this room, it would be weird. But fine, let's play along. How does everybody react?
You'll never lose me, or me, or me, or me.
For me.
And my axe.
It's awesome getting to see such a personal, familiar experience, even considered in a mainstream TV series. When it's done well, I love that we can have a character come out to their friends and be accepted for exactly who they are. And given everything we've talked about, I'm not remotely surprised that Netflix made sure everybody in this scene pledges their unconditional loyalty to Will like it's an after-school special, or like they're about to go throw a ring into a volcano. But this is 1987. I obviously want Will to be supported and happy, but there are multiple people in this room, not pointing any fingers, who would not respond compassionately to that information. The 1980s were homophobic as hell. They're right in the middle of the AIDS pandemic here, often referred to as the gay plague by people at the time. Between nobody taking the disease seriously and a rise in violent hate crimes, identifying yourself as a gay man was incredibly dangerous. Even when Ronald Reagan finally addressed it in the year this scene is happening, he made sure to blame the victims for bringing it upon themselves.
We're still learning about how AIDS is transmitted. You don't get it from shaking hands or sitting on a bus or anywhere else for that matter.
Presidents, am I right? All this to say, any given person in this decade is just as likely to be homophobic as they were to be tolerant. But in Will's case, everyone takes turns hugging him, and then once that's over, they get back to killing Satan. I'm not saying I wish we could have seen Murray call Will a slur and storm out of the room, but it's very clear that Netflix didn't consider any of the implications of this scene and just wanted to farm as much clout from it as possible. It removes all the weight from this moment, and as a result, nobody acts like a real person. Like, sure, his mom and brother are gonna be supportive. They've known the whole time, but nobody else even gives an in-character response. Even if none of these people gave the correct corporate-approved reaction, it wouldn't make us suddenly hate them, and they wouldn't suddenly hate Will. It would just be consistent with who we already know they are.
He's a sensitive kid. Lonnie used to say he was queer, called him a
Is he?
He's missing.
Your characters are flawed, imperfect human beings, and if you're going to put them in situations that test their morality, you have to be prepared to deal with the honest consequences of their potential failure. Earlier this season, Mike's sister Holly gets kidnapped by Vecna and trapped in a dream prison where she runs into Max, who is in a coma in the real world and has already been trapped here for 2 years. When Holly arrives, she realizes there might finally be a way out. They brave Holly's memories in one final attempt to escape, barely making it to the exit, and only then does Holly realize the door only works for Max. But Max knew that the entire time. This somehow hadn't even occurred to me, so I was equally taken off guard by what was shaping up to be a pretty fucked up betrayal, but it made perfect sense. Max has been completely isolated inside Freddy Krueger's mind palace for double the length of most people's quarantine experiences, with no ability to even perceive the passage of time. Her only safe spot inside a swirling torrent of nightmarish visions has been a cave in the desert. Max has always been a survivalist, and it's totally within character at this point for her to use this random girl to escape. She's not going to tell her anything that might jeopardize that chance. Max's guilt would then add an extra layer to her relief at finally escaping, and then Holly's feeling of betrayal and hopelessness could force her into a character-defining moment. Either she has to return to who she now knows is a monster, or she has to rely on her own inner strength and the last memory of her brother to conjure up her own portal and escape. And then when Max goes back to save Holly later on, it would be so much more meaningful to both of them. But before any of that could happen, Max explains exactly what to do, and Holly gets out.
You just need something that connects you to the real world. Something that makes you feel safe. How did you know that would work? I didn't.
Not only is this obviously tacked on by the studio to make sure the quality of Max's character can't possibly be called into question, but they are running away from Satan's hell dimension. The last time Max did this, she missed the portal by mere seconds. And now she's just gonna pause and give this girl an inspirational pep talk? Like, yeah, it's fucked up to just abandon Holly here after convincing her to go along with the plan, but she'd do it. The decision is 99% made at this point. Holly even points out every reason it would never going to go any other way during the scene.
You have to find your own way. How? I don't have Kate Bush. I don't even know who Kate Bush is.
But of course, Max has an uplifting answer to every single one of them, and they both escape into their own independent conflicts with no consequences or ill will from anything that happened. Netflix's moral sanitization is so bad this season, they can't even allow Vecna himself to be at fault for his own actions. After deciding in season 4 that the Eldritch hive mind was in fact just one man controlling everything, they retconned their own retcon by establishing that young Henry got infected by a mysterious rock and has actually just been under the influence of the Mind Flayer this whole time.
It wasn't you. It was never you.
The guy's just misunderstood. I'm pretty sure that the psychic demon serial killer fails to serial kill even once in this entire season. Even though he can remotely dismember people and create full-on hallucinations, he only interferes with the attempts to stop him one time, when he makes Hopper accidentally shoot 11, but then they immediately take that back. The Wheeler parents don't end up dying, all of the kids make it out unscathed, and even when he gets straight up possessed and has his limbs snapped in half by a twink using his own powers against him, he never even bothers to hunt the kid down. In the end, all blame for anyone's suffering, and therefore the unpleasant task of answering any difficult moral questions, are placed firmly where they belong, on the giant CGI rock spider that we can shoot with lots of guns, thereby destroying all responsibility to ever address these topics ever again. The ability to accurately depict good people who do bad things, or people whose morals conflict with each other, and the consequences of the resulting conflict is just a sign of a skilled writer. The last morally gray era of screenwriting definitely had its issues, but stories exist to safely recreate real experiences and help us grapple with difficult emotions without having to actually go through it ourselves, and honest depictions of flawed human beings are an essential part of that. In short, let your characters do bad things sometimes. We all make mistakes, sometimes even the same mistake twice. We all want to be good people, but the fact is you have to put in the work to change, and that process is hard. And watching a character go through a familiar struggle can be educational or just make you feel seen, and that's what stories are great for. The same story may not connect with everybody the same way, but that's okay. Another story will. Art is personal and unique, meant to be appreciated by the people who can appreciate it. When it works equally as well for everyone, it's no longer art. There's no telling how deep this trend will go before it reverses again, but I think it's important to be able to identify the pattern and what causes it. I imagine there are a lot of young, aspiring writers growing up with this media and initially assuming that it's normal. But time and again, we've seen that this character sanitization isn't the result of skilled writing. It's intentional censorship, and the consequence of distribution options once again being limited to a select few hands. If you disagree with this whole video, and you think all my examples are perfectly satisfying emotional stories, there's a filmmaker you might enjoy named Darman. Ta-da! Do you remember Merkrag's Compendium of Curios, the book of magic items by Goblin Society Games, two-time sponsor of these very essays? If you don't, then you're a fake fan, and you don't deserve to know about Merkrag's Bargain Bin, the new parody book. But they did pay me to tell you about it, so you got lucky this time. Throwing absurdly specific magic items at my players just to see what they do with them is honest to God my favorite thing to do when DMing, and this book is a gold mine. It introduces 30 new magic items of questionable quality, all either limited, counterintuitive, or otherwise just so very strange that you may wonder how they could ever be useful. But with the right lack of cleverness, your party could perhaps just destroy all your best laid plans. Some personal favorites are the Armor of Overprotection, which acts like an airbag and gives you a big AC boost and restrains you for a turn when you're hit. The Compass of Lies, which has a 75% chance of pointing out liars in your midst, but a 25% chance of lying to you. And the Sack of Locusts, which is mostly self-explanatory. Goblin Society Games is a small, independent company making cool D&D supplements and original games, and they deserve so much more attention. So if you're a tabletop RPG fan, check out the links in the description to grab yourself a PDF or hard copy of Merkrag's Bargain Bin. Welcome to After the Credits, an exclusive club that most people leave. Thank you again to our writers and our editor for putting this video together. This one was actually on time for once, and it was really a great experience. I'm excited for the next one. I'm starting on it right after I finish this. If you want more content, you might have heard, we have this Patreon. There's a bunch of older videos, like a whole library of stuff uploaded there, and we're gonna be adding new things every single month to that. We also have a daily live stream over at twitch.tv/DoormonsterTV. Some days, Mondays, Tuesdays, Thursdays, Fridays. It's at 8:30 a.m. Eastern time. Me and Allison do a morning show. If you like this video, consider liking it, subscribing, leaving a comment, doing all the engagement things. It really does help out. If you'd like to talk to us more or hang out with our community, check out our Discord. There's a link in the description of every single video, and there's cool people there. I'll see ya. I don't have to go to sleep right now. I'm kind of okay.